Welcome to the Excel Pod. Welcome to the Untied Podcast, where we unravel the knots of life with faith, wisdom, and encouragement, because together we're here to untie from tradition and embrace truth through powerful Bible teaching. I am here with my very good friend, Corey Sawyers, and today we are rolling into our study for Season 4, which is on the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapters 5 through 7, I'm excited to get into this study. We've got a lot going on here. We did a little bit of an introduction last week. We didn't get too deep into it because we covered a few other things, but today we're going to get into it, and I'm excited for that. And so we're glad that you have joined us today. And before we get into this, we do hope that if you are enjoying this podcast or any of our podcasts on the Excel Pod Network, we hope and pray that you will like, follow, share, and subscribe because that helps all of our podcasts, helps it to grow. And we hope that you would, if you like it, that you would share it with others so that they may be able to take part in these studies too. The whole idea or effort of this is just simply to help people to grow in their knowledge and to think on things biblically, not with anything any predetermined ideas, but just allow the text to speak where it speaks and untie from all things that might make you have some kind of forethought on the text, but allow it to speak for itself. So that is the idea, and that's what we're shooting for. So we're glad that you have joined us today. And as we do each episode, we're getting into our first segment, which is probably going to be a little shorter today. But our first segment is What's Been Cooking? So, Corey, what's cooking, man?
Well, honestly, not a lot. We've nothing extraordinary. I've done some chicken thighs on the smoker, and I've gotten where every time we have hamburger, I've gotten to where I'm smoking them and then reverse searing them at the end. So we did that this weekend. We had some hamburger steaks like that. We're gearing up. We do once a month here at the Martin congregation. We do on Wednesday night a dinner and devo, and everybody comes in at about. There's lots of women that have really just gone overboard into this ministry and try to make it something where it's a routine fellowship. Maybe makes it a little easier on that particular Wednesday night for families to make it to Bible study, and they prepare a big meal for everybody. And so everybody shows up about 5:30. We have some sort of something to eat, and then some of the young boys have been doing a little devo and saying a prayer for us and some of that kind of thing back there in the fellowship room. But the lady that's kind of been ramrodding all this, she decided that for April, she wanted to give all of the ladies that have been cooking some time off and, just do barbecue sandwiches and chips and something simple. And she was asking me, where's the best place to buy barbecue? And I'm like, well, I can tell you some places, but buying barbecue for that many people, that's going to be pretty expensive. And she said, well, would you do it? And I said, I guess. So anyway, I'm going to do this coming week, I'm going to smoke for 22 for about 200 people. So we're guesstimating we're going to need about somewhere between 15 and 18 Boston butts, and depending on the size we get. And so it's going to be a big undertaking. So,
man, you're going to be buying a bigger smoker after this.
I keep trying to tell the elders and Melody, what we need most for our ministry is like a big, giant professional grade competition level
big
smoker.
trailer smoker. That's right.
Yeah. Like we've talked about this before. We could do evangelism as we're sitting around the fires during the night at the competitions. And, I'm not getting people to buy on, but, the great ideas are always the ones hardest for people to accept. So,
Well, I love the idea of doing something like that. Man, that's going to be a pretty good undertaking, smoking all those. So, how many do you think you can fit on at one time?
I'm thinking I can do half of them at one time. So, what I'm thinking right now is that I'm going to do half of them, let them cool, put them in the refrigerator, and then the day before, and then the next day, get up and start the other ones rolling real early in the morning, and they'll get done right at time to eat. But halfway through the day, I can take those others out and put them in the warmer and get them all warmed back up. And so.
Well, that's better than I thought. I really wasn't sure how many you could fit at once.
I did a Boston butt the other day, and so we were kind of gauging by it, Gannon and I, and that's what we're guessing we can do them that way. If not, I may be calling in someone else and saying, "Hey, can you bring your smoker over to my house and let me?" So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, that'll be a lot of fun.
But at least starting early, I'll know. If I can't get but a third of them on there on Tuesday, then I can call somebody and borrow another smoker, and Wednesday have two smokers rolling. And so, anyway.
Yeah. Well, that'll be awesome. That'll be awesome. You're going to be starting your own catering business for too long.
It will be a sweet smelling savor rising up to the Lord. So,
yeah, that'll be good. That will be very good. Yeah, I've been using the Blackstone a little bit more than the smoker here over the last couple of weeks, but we've been doing so much baseball. It's a lot quicker to do it on the Blackstone, but it's been burgers and breakfast and stuff like that. So that's kind of all that we've been cooking around the house. But baseball seems to overtake all of life, it seems. In fact, right after this, I'm heading to a baseball game after we get done recording. So we've got two today in two different places. So we'll be at this morning in one place and then later this evening in another. So I'll be able to get the audio of this out on time, but the video probably will be a little bit later. So, but we'll get it done.
Well, we've got... At the house, we've got a Blackstone. It's not a Blackstone. It's a whatever the Sam's brand version of that is. Here at the church, we've got two. And Gannon and I did this past Saturday. We had our big Easter extravaganza, the Easter egg hunt for the kids and all that. And we did about, I think it was about 200, 225, something like that, hot dogs on the two Blackstones. He manned one and I manned the other. And they were the Sam's Club hot dogs, the beef ones. They were extra. They were actually pretty good.
They are.
Which I'd rather have an all beef hot dog anyway. But
we in September we have a big area wide, and it's been over here at something called P-Bar Farms, which has a cornfield maze and several things like that. And we always have. There's always been around somewhere around 500 that show up to that, and that's what we do. We'll cook a whole bunch of those, and we'll have two Blackstones out there just grilling them up, trying to get them all done. So they do pretty good. Those beef hot dogs, they cook pretty good too.
Yeah. We just turned it on low, and let them take their time, and but it was really good. Of course, we sampled a couple because that's biblical, not to muzzle the ox that's treading out the corn, so we had to sample a few of them. But anyway.
Speaking of hot dogs, we were at a baseball game, big shocker, 2 days ago here in Hydro. And one of the girls from church, she was working the concession stand, and she had made a hot dog and apparently had made it how the person wanted it, but it was the wrong kind of relish. And so they were like, well, we don't want it. So anyway, they just had it, and she ran up to me, and I was on the phone. She said, do you want this? I was like, sure. So I get to looking at it, and it is mustard and sweet relish. So I tried it. It's pretty stout. I would not recommend it. Not my favorite combo. So maybe if there's a different relish, might be, but woo, it was stout. So,
well, my philosophy with hot dog, did you ever watch Matlock?
The new one or the old one?
The old one.
Okay, yeah, I've never seen the new one. Yes, I've seen the old one, yeah.
With the Andy Griffith.
Yes.
My philosophy for hot dogs is basically like Matlock's. If you remember, there was that hot dog stand at the courthouse, and he was forevermore, he'd get one, and everything that they had on there, he'd pile on the hot dog. And that's kind of my philosophy with hot dogs is the more stuff you can put on it, maybe to drown out the hot dog taste, I guess. I don't know, but
yeah.
I will tell you, talking about sweet relish, when I went to Oklahoma City a couple weekends ago, and we were there for the Men's Day. I always try, when I go off by myself, I bring a little something back to Melody and the boys, and didn't have really a chance to go anywhere or do anything. So I'm at the airport, and they've got, in one of the little things there, they've got these different kinds of socks, and both Gannon and Melody love different looking socks. So I get Gannon some socks that have bacon and eggs on them. Mm-hmm. My wife loves pickles. Okay. So I get her a pair of green socks that have pickles all over them. And I give them to her, and she said, oh, that's cute. Are these sweet or dill pickles? And I'm like,
they're socks.
I didn't sample them, but so I will now know if she actually is watching our podcast. If she says, I can't believe you said that on the air, I may need you to edit that out.
We apologize, Melody. We don't have editing software, so. Well, I wish that I would have known that, because there is a few around here that make their own pickles, and there's some that are sold over here at the store. They're sold in a few places, but they're made here in Oklahoma, called Jan's Pickles, and man, they're so good. So next time you're here,
somebody introduced those to us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think somebody, that sounds familiar. I think maybe somebody at one point at Oklahoma let us sample a Jan's pickle or something.
Yeah, they're good. They're so good. It's been a little bit since I've had them. They're sweet. I'm not a real big sweet pickle person, but these are, you just put them in the refrigerator, you put them by me, I'll eat the whole jar of them. But I like the ones that are, they're spicy. Man, they're so good. So next time you're here, you'll have to remind me, and I'll make sure and get Melody some of those, get her a jar of Jan's pickles.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Yeah. So
yeah, she's a pickle kind of. She used to, when we lived out in the country, and we'd have a big garden. She'd put up all kinds. Bread and butter is my favorite kind of pickle, but she would do some sweet for the boys, and she'd do a lot of dill. That's what she prefers, I think. But there were no, if you're Andy Griffith fan, no kerosene cucumbers with Melody. They were really good. But
my sister-in-law, when she was pregnant with their last child, she had a craving for the jalapeno kettle chips and bread and butter pickles. And she
Together?
and she would put the pickle on the chip and just eat it up. And I was like, what are you doing? She goes, Don't knock it till you try it. And so me and her sat and ate a whole bag together. And man, it's a good combo. Just saying, it's a good combo. Jalapeno kettle chips and bread and butter pickles. Just scoop them up, eat it. It's good. You wouldn't
never
think
know.
so.
When I first got to Paris, Tennessee, to preach at the Eastwood congregation, there was a fellow there that one of our deacons that I didn't really know. This is how I got to know him, actually. But he had just had a massive heart attack and just gotten home from St. Thomas up in Nashville. And I called his adult daughter and asked her, I said, "What's your dad's favorite snack? I'm going to go over to the house and bring him some before he has to go back to the doctor's appointment where they tell him he can't have anything good to eat ever again." And she laughed and she said, "No, you're going to think this is funny." I said, "Okay." And she said, "Lay's potato chips, Knott's pimento cheese, and Meliella." And he just take the Lay's potato chip and dip the pimento cheese, the Lay's potato chip, dip the pimento cheese out and eat it like it was a dip. And that Meliella, and of course, that was 3 things that the doctor told him about a month later. You don't need to eat those things. So he was very appreciative.
Oh, I cannot do pimento cheese. No way. I do not like it.
I love pimento cheese.
Ooh. Well, on that note, oh man, my grandmother, she loves pimento cheese too, but I just did not inherit that gene. So, but well, I know that there's a lot going on, and we just love to chat. Corey and I are such good friends, so we just love to talk about different things, and cooking is one of those things that we like to talk about, and so we have no idea if you like to listen.
You can look at us and tell food is a hot topic around our places.
I don't know what you're talking about. I am.
Yeah. For those of you listening to the podcast,
we are slim.
We're both 6'2", 175 pounds, 3% body fat,
lean and mean. That's us.
Yeah. And those of you that are watching the podcast on YouTube know that
that we're repenting right now of our sins.
Yeah, in sackcloth and ashes.
Oh man. Well,
but we need a lot of sackcloth.
Yep. That's true. That's true. Well, we are in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. We're getting into this introducing the study. This is a great study. I can't remember if I said this last week. I was telling somebody this. So if I'm repeating this, sorry, but I'm just going to do it because I can't remember. So there was a few years ago that me and a good friend of mine, Billy Clayball, were asked to be on a summer series, and we had the sermons of the Bible, and I had Joshua, and he had drawn somehow the Sermon on the Mount, and he called me and he said, "I really don't know what to do with this. Like, how do you improve it? How do you?" And I was like, "You need to just get up there and read it and be done. When it's over, it's over." And I think that he ended up doing that. He did some introduction stuff to it and then read it and, let it be what it was. But I thought, that's a really powerful thing. Even a few years ago, Tim Piles from Broken Arrow, the congregation up there, he had Affirming of the Faith, had I think it was a class in the auditorium, and a whole part of his lesson, he just quoted it and he had the whole thing memorized, quoted it, and it really added some cool stuff to it. And so this is such a powerful sermon that everybody needs to at least read through several times a year, but especially dive into it and really, pick out some of those great things that are in this sermon, because you really will be, as we're fixing to talk about, you're going to be blessed by all of these words. So I'm really excited to get into this, Corey.
Yeah. And just a reminder from last week, the Matthew's mission in his gospel is to convince the Jews that Jesus is the prophesied Messiah. So Jesus is going to do a lot of miracles. You look at the end of chapter 4, and he's healing everybody and doing all sorts of miraculous things. And that draws crowds. And when there's crowds that get together, he preaches. And this is the first of 5 big speech sections in the book of Matthew. They expected the Messiah to be a prophet like Moses, and they expected him to be able to teach in big and dramatic ways, and he's going to rock the world with this sermon, so that will cause him to do more miracles to justify his ability to be able to speak as he has, and that will draw more crowds, and it's just a continuing process. But that's kind of the context that we're in, and helping them to see, as we talked about last week, about righteousness, what righteousness is all about. We sometimes will use some of these Beatitudes kind of, as Dan Owen would say, land the helicopter, pick it up, and drag it out, and do whatever we want to with it. And that's fine to some extent. But in the context of the sermon, it's about righteousness. And just keep that in mind as we go through this. We may say some things that challenge you, some things that you've heard before. But, those first 2 verses, or first verse rather, he saw the crowds and he went up on the mountain and he begins to preach. So here's a bunch of people. What are we going to do? Let's teach them what God's standard for righteousness really is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess just as we start, we have this word that shows up in each verse, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 11. It's that word blessed. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like, and we can have some conversation around this, but of course, have a few of these things highlighted if you're watching this, righteousness in here, for instance. But the word blessed seems to, I don't know, I almost feel like people get confused about that word here, because we have in a lot of cases, we define it as happy, and it can mean happy. It can mean actually several things, but it really seems, you mentioned Dan Owen. Dan Owen is one who really helped me to understand that words are not defined by their definition, they're defined by context. And in this whole section, I've heard this taught as blessed always means happy, or even the idea of congratulations or something like that. But while the result, when we get down to the latter part of this first section here in the Sermon on the Mount, the result here is going to be happiness, rejoice and be glad, verse 12. That certainly is in play here. But the idea of the word blessed is actually of being right with God. It has to do with being approved by God, because we are living in a certain way. So the idea of being blessed really is not the beginning, it's the outcome of the action, if you will. So the word blessed is an adjective, and it's describing those who are poor in spirit, those who mourn. So I think that, first and foremost is something for us to consider. So if we're thinking about this word, and just as I was getting ready for this, I thought, man, this is used all over the place. If we consider how this word is used throughout the text, last season we talked about Psalms, and Psalm 1 and 2 is really, there's bookends there. We discussed that with the word blessed. Blessed is the man, in Psalm 1 and verse 1. Blessed is the man who, let me get over there. Crud, I'm going blank here. The man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, does not stand in the seat of, stand and sit and, all that. This is what the blessed man does not do, in other words. But then you get down to the end of Psalm 2, and then in verse 12, he ends, how blessed are those who take refuge in him. So Psalm 1, those who are blessed are walking in the word of the Lord, and those who are blessed in Psalm 2 are recognizing the anointed king. Well, you can look in, and I'll just give these texts. We don't have to go into them, but Deuteronomy 33:29 is another place that discusses the idea of being blessed. Psalm 32, verses 1 and 2, how blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. How blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity. Or even James chapter 1 and verse 12, blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. So this idea of blessed doesn't really have to do with happiness, although happiness is the result, but it has to do really with the idea of being approved by God. And I don't know, there's so many other texts this could connect to, but it's a reliance, it's a trust, it's a living in the right way, and blessed is the result of these different actions.
That's right. And like with Psalm 1, what I try to teach people is the blessed, if you look in the book of Psalms, like Psalm 2 and verse 12, is blessed is the ones who take refuge in him. I think Psalm 34 has that same thing in there. Psalm 32 that you pointed out is a good one. Psalm 40, blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust. So, that's the Hebrew word, but it's the equivalent of this word that we have translated in Greek for us. And even like when you get down to the end of this list of the Beatitudes, people are going to revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things against you, and that's going to make me happy, Mm-hmm. So the word beatitude comes from the Latin word that means like perfect happiness. But as you said, this is more of about a spiritual relationship, one that is putting his focus on the right things. I mean, blessed are those who mourn. Happy are the people who mourn? I don't think so.
No.
There is a joy that supersedes the things in this life that comes from our relationship with God. But like I said, I think you're right in that we sometimes lean these Beatitudes towards like this is the way to have a happy life. Not so much that, it's a way to be in a right relationship with God.
Yeah. And we have been studying with our kids for Lads to Leaders. This year's 1st and 2nd Peter and James. And last night we talked about a lot of things, but in 1 Peter, I really believe that Peter in all of his writings, it is so heavily influenced by the words of Jesus, by the example of Christ. And everything in 1 Peter goes back to this idea of chapter 2 and verse 12, keeping your behavior excellent among the Gentiles and all that kind of stuff. So in the day of visitation, they may glorify God. A rendition of that anyway. But everything goes to that. So he gives several examples, like 4 different groups that he talks about in chapter 2 into chapter 3. He talks about authorities. He talks about marriage. He talks about masters and slaves, those relationships, and then ultimately the relationship with God. But in several of those examples, he's discussing the idea that you could be treated terribly by this person, but how are you supposed to act toward them? And then you have that chapter 2, 21 through 29, or 21 through 25, and then chapter 4, 14 through 19, that's discussing the suffering of Jesus. But then on the other hand, in chapter 4, it's discussing your suffering. And what what he gets at here is that there is going to be glory that's to come, even in your sorrow, even in your persecution, even if you're reviled. If you're reviled for the name of Christ, essentially we could use the same word. You are going to be greatly blessed. So again, what we've considered here, just as we start with this idea of being blessed, this doesn't have anything to do with your current situation or life. You being poor in spirit, this is, we're talking about poverty. We're talking about, humility, those, being persecuted. This is how one is supposed to be in the worst times, in the worst days of your life. And the blessings come after. So it's always with the view of what is to come. And that's why these Beatitudes are so powerful in my mind, because it is this forward way of thinking, which really connects with, and there's so many parallels, Matthew 6, just going a little bit further, in verse 33 and 34, you have, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. This is like the result. It's playing all into the same thing. So there certainly is a lot to think about in reference to how these things play a role within our current situation in life as followers of Jesus.
Yeah, and I don't know what your take on it is. We may not see this the same way, and that's fine. But I don't even view this as much as like their state in life here on this earth, as much as their relationship with God. So,
yes,
like the first one, and I may be getting ahead of where you want to be, but like the very first one, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. We'll use that in funeral settings, or after someone has passed or someone is struggling with whatever. And it's true that God cares about us, and He wants us to, to bring all of our problems to, Him, and He cares about us and can give us a peace that passes understanding and all this. But in the context here, the way I view it at least, is that He's talking about spiritual things and righteousness. So blessed are, God approved are the ones who mourn, not necessarily over the death of a loved one or whatnot, but over sin. It's a spiritual thing, because, like Paul talks about the difference in godly sorrow and sorrow of the world. Well, that's kind of the idea here, is the God approved ones are the ones that have the godly kind of sorrow that's going to lead towards repentance. That's how they're going to be comforted, is that knowing that if they have a relationship with God, they can have forgiveness for those things. So I may be jumping too quickly into verse 4, but all of these, as we go through them, I think there's more of a spiritual righteousness connection than we sometimes look into them as, and that's the way that my take on them, and the way that I usually teach them anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, and just thinking about this from a contextual standpoint in the life of Christ, we're still at the beginning of His ministry. So, this is something that they're going to live with from this day forward. And the reality, and again, we're just kind of looking at this from every angle. I don't believe that this is the only time that Jesus preached this sermon.
No.
This is something that I think that He preached all the time. In fact, Luke chapter 6 is a place, I think Luke 6:20 through the rest of the chapter is called the Sermon on the Plain, very similar. And so this was something that Jesus was kind of making His rounds with and teaching this to a lot of people. And this is an introduction, if you will, to the more spiritual side of what He's actually bringing, because this covenant, this agreement, this gospel, all of this is more of a spiritual aspect than it was a physical thing, as the old law was. So this introduction is leading them to, this is our way of life. This is what we're looking for. This is how we handle things. And so this isn't something that they're able to make application of throughout the entirety of their life from this point forward, and would ultimately even lead them to a place that in their time of physical suffering, or in their time of just random hardship, or in their time where they're growing in understanding to obey the gospel, this would apply, I think, to everything, especially like you said, from a spiritual perspective. And this is a great way to introduce this teaching. And another thing is that, just like in Mark chapter 1, when this thing is over, these people are looking at him going, this guy is different.
Wow.
Because he is teaching as someone who has authority, unlike the scribes who are basically teaching somebody else's words, or Rabbi so-and-so said. Well, Jesus is teaching as if he's the originator of this message. He's got authority. And that's something they've never heard before, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't quoting other guys. It was, you've heard it said, but I say it unto you. That's what he's going to do at the end of the chapter here. But
right.
I think we talked about this last week. This introduction of the sermon, the way I break it down at least, these first verses 2 through 20 of chapter 5, he starts off with the Beatitudes, then he talks about salt and light, and then the thesis and the way that, and I don't remember if I came up with this or I stole it from somebody, so if someone's listening and said, hey, I preached that and Corey was there, then I'm sorry that I don't remember to give you credit. But the Beatitudes is like what righteousness looks like in God's sight. And then the salt and light section is what righteousness looks like in man's sight, the example that we give to others. And then you get into verses 17 through 20 where he's going to get into the thesis. But he's introducing this whole sermon on righteousness with this idea, starting with the Beatitudes, of this is what righteousness looks like from God's perspective, which is what he's going to do in the contrast of chapter 5 and in the areas of chapter 6. I know you've been taught by the scribes and Pharisees some things, but here's God's perspective on righteousness. So it's a good and memorable way to start. You know, we want to, in our sermons, we want to have an introduction, a hook that catches people right off the bat. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine Jesus standing up and the first thing he says is, blessed are the poor. Well, everybody there pretty much is poor. But then he says, poor in spirit, you know.
Yeah.
For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Wait a minute. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle. They'll inherit the earth. You know, all of these different, not only things that they can put themselves in the shoes of what he's talking about, but the twist that he puts on it is so remarkable. Then, like, I got to hear more about what this guy is going to say, you know, so.
Right. Well, you know, and I don't know how much of a role this plays into it. I'd like to know what you think about this, but, you know, what the people were looking for, as we mentioned, they were looking for another Moses type figure. But also, you know, if you're looking at or reading in other gospel accounts, they're really looking for a new king that's going to come and mainly make Israel a ruling power again. And so they're looking for multiple things, and that's why so many are turning away from him, going, this guy really doesn't fit what I have in my mind. Right. So for him to start off looking, like you said, at a group of people who really don't have anything, and he's saying, you're blessed and you're going to receive the kingdom, those things don't make any sense. So, yeah, what a great hook. I love that idea. A great hook to catch their attention, because this really is, I mean, we call it verse 3, but this is the area where this is the attention grabber, and everything just essentially builds off of that, which is building this idea. He's teaching unlike anyone else I've ever heard. So, yeah, really, really powerful stuff here. So, let me go ahead and just read through this section here, and we can talk about a little bit of it, and then we'll probably break this episode into two different episodes as we study this text. So here's how it begins. I'll just read 1 through 12, this first section in here, and as Corey said, this is really introducing the idea of righteousness in the eyes of God. So it says, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. He opened his mouth and began to teach them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in spirit, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So this whole section here is contrary in many ways to probably what the Jewish mind was thinking as the Messiah was coming to introduce, this new way of living and this new idea of kingdom that's going to be eternal. If you're reading back all the way into Daniel, so very contrary, but very catching at the same time. So again, this is about being approved by God, being right in the eyes of God, and not necessarily being happy, although the result of these things is, of course, true happiness. Rejoice and be glad because your reward in heaven is great. That's the whole, I think, point that's being made here. So anyway, this is kind of how it's all laid out. So Corey, how far do you want to get into this as we kind of wind down here?
Well, we can just, whatever you want to do. I'm along for the ride. You tell me when to go and start. And then tell me when to stop and cease. That's right.
Well, if I
don't hush up, you can mute me.
Let's look at the first two here. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let's talk about that one as we get into this and kind of wind down the study. But let's start there. There's a lot of and I think that you had mentioned this. There's a lot of contrasts that are made, and the contrast, it seems, starts right here with what Jesus is saying versus what the Pharisees or the scribes are teaching. That, and this goes all the way back to even the idea of Job, that if you live righteously, you're going to be blessed. But their idea of being blessed had to do with physical blessings. And so if you are righteous during those days, then God would bless you with wealth and all those different things. But he's looking at a group of people who are not wealthy and saying, you're going to be blessed. So there's a huge contrast in this idea of material blessing or prosperity and the favor that God is going to give you as a result of your obedience to him and your attitude and the way that you walk. So this is a huge contrast that's already beginning in difference of teaching and attitude and mindset.
Yeah, and the word that's translated poor means to be deficient, to not have much. And it's usually talking about poor in material things. But he tells us here what we're poor in spirit. Yeah. They have a recognition of their need for God. And they know that without a relationship with God, they are spiritually empty, spiritually needy. And again, we're going to get down to verse 20. Unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Scribes and Pharisees thought of themselves as the best of the best and that they didn't lack anything spiritually, almost like, I don't know that they came right out and said it this way, but their attitude was almost like, God's pretty lucky to have me on his team. And that's if we're not careful, that's kind of the way that we can, the mindset that we can get into, that we don't recognize how badly we need God, that, I'm saved by grace and that I can't earn it or deserve it on my own, but that I am constantly, we sing a song, in need of grace, in need of love, in need of mercy raining down to have that constant mindset. The Bible tells us if we compare ourselves with ourselves, we're fools. That's what we do sometimes. Well, I'm not as bad as so-and-so, or I haven't done what so-and-so has. And so, I'm pretty, but to recognize every day how much, here's an older song we sing, I need thee every hour. To every hour realize without God, I'm nothing. In ministry, we can get into that, look at what we've done or what we've grown or how many we baptized or, whatever. We can do that. Sometimes we do these congregational end of the year reports and look at how much we've given to this and how much, when it ought to be, look at how much God has done through us or with us. Mm-hmm. Because without him, we really are nothing. And, but someone who really recognizes that is someone who is going to do everything they can for the Lord and do whatever he asks them to do. And that's why that person is going to be God approved, is because they recognize how much they need God and they're willing to submit to him. Mm-hmm. And then doing that, you're going to have the greatest reward that you can possibly have, being a part of the kingdom of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That brings to mind, you talked about those who are judging themselves by themselves. Paul wrote about that in 2 Corinthians with the false teachers who were, basically trying to write Paul off and claim themselves to be so great. But the difference between Paul and those false teachers was, as you say, his trust. And so in 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 10, Paul talks about his experience in Asia, which is back in 1 Corinthians 15, I think it's around 30, 31, 32, somewhere in there, where he had fought with wild beasts, whatever and whoever those were. But the idea there is that he had to stop. He was in a situation where he had to stop trusting in himself and begin trusting in the Lord. And that is because God is the one who has the power to raise from the dead. So this is really important. And so our ability to completely put our trust in God and not in ourselves, again, like you said, is so outside the way of thinking from the Sanhedrin as a whole, but especially what's mentioned specifically, even in Mark 1, is that, the things that the scribes have been teaching. So what this is, I think, helping right off the bat people to understand is that it doesn't matter who you are or what your physical situation is. Even if you are, poor, wealth-wise, you can still be, even if you have nothing, a recipient of the love of God. And so everybody has this opportunity to receive the love of God, the blessings of God, and you can all be a part of this kingdom that is coming and that's going to be established. And so there's so many things that seem to be, coming into the mix here.
Yeah, I don't know that he's talking about the poor physically as much as just the people. You think about what is it, Luke 18, maybe, where Jesus tells about the two men that went up to the temple to pray. Mm-hmm. One was a Pharisee and one was a tax collector. And in the way that people viewed them spiritually, there's no greater contrast than that. The Pharisees are the epitome in what they thought, the epitome of righteousness. A tax collector was so bad because they're working for the Romans. They're so bad that we don't want to offend the other sinners by putting them in the same category. So throughout the New Testament, you see them talking about tax collectors and sinners because we don't want to offend the sinners, But as bad as opposite ends of the spectrum as you can get, you've got this one guy who is a Pharisee who believes, I'm so thankful I'm not like this guy. Aren't you glad that I'm one of yours, Lord? And then the other guy wouldn't even look up to the heavens, but he beat on his chest and asked God to forgive him, a sinner. And Jesus says that's the one that goes to his house justified because he's the one that's poor in spirit. Mm-hmm. Tax collectors were pretty wealthy. Yeah. Physically. Very wealthy. But spiritually, he realizes he's bankrupt. Mm-hmm. And that's the idea here, and you know this because as long as you've been in ministry, you've talked to people that 10 minutes in the conversation, you realize I'm not going to get anywhere with them because they don't think they need anything, and and then you've dealt with people that it's like they can't. You're wanting them to take their time so they make a decision to commit to the Lord, and they're like, "No, I've got to. I need in the water today."
Yeah.
And that such a, like you said, it's such a stark contrast. We can see it physically, the difference in the rich and the poor. It's harder for us to see the difference in the rich and the poor spiritually, but that's what really matters. And whether you're rich or poor physically, you've got to be poor spiritually to be approved by God.
Right. And really the view that I'm coming from is, because we're both on the same page, is that Jesus is talking about this from a spiritual perspective, but the people are not getting that, I don't think, at this point.
Right. No, yeah.
So go ahead.
I agree. That's what. If I acted like I thought we were in contrast, I didn't mean to.
No.
That's the I think the kind of the illustration that he want. Like I put up images on a PowerPoint to get people thinking about things physically, and then that's what he's doing. We can see that contrast physically so easily. Like somebody walks in and you can tell whether they're rich or poor. You can't do that spiritually right off the bat. And Jesus is saying that that's the contrast here. If you're going to be right in God's sight, you can't even be like, remember the rich young ruler that comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And he tells him all these things. And he says, "I've done all this from my youth up." Well, one more thing, sell all you have and come follow me. That's not a blanket statement for everybody. Jesus knew there was something that would keep that guy from following him.
Right.
Because he didn't think of himself. Now, in my experience, oftentimes it's the physically poor that are more able to see their spiritual poverty, But anyway, it's just it's a reminder of the fact that there's a big difference in there's no middle class spiritually, just like there was no middle class back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just think about all the warnings or things that Jesus said. I mean, Luke 6, woe to the rich. I mean, he has so many teachings toward the rich. Now, it's not because they're rich. There's nothing wrong with being rich. I mean, no. I'm fine. If I was rich, I'd be good with it. I know.
Well, 1 Timothy 6, he talks about the rich, and he says God has blessed you with that.
Yeah.
For two reasons. So you can enjoy yourself, you can enjoy your life, and you can help others and support ministries and those kinds of things as well.
Yeah, and I really think
it's the love of money, not money.
Right,
that's the root
exactly. Because I really do think that one of a spiritual gift that somebody can have, or a gift that somebody, is the ability to make wealth. And there are certainly a lot of people. I mean, somebody can deny that all they want, but all you got to do is open your eyes. There are people who just know how to do it. But they can use those dollars to support great works, or evil works, of course. But within the church, they can do great things with that, and that's a great gift that people have. But like you said, this is really teachings toward the heart, and understanding the deeper meaning of each of these things is very, very important. Therefore, here's a warning, here's something to think about if you are very, very wealthy, because that can also be a trap. That can also, introduce pride into your life. And like we said earlier, get you to thinking that you're enough. But all that money, like Jesus talked about the guy who, he planted everything, he filled his barns, and I mean, he had everything that he needed. And the next day he died. Mm-hmm. He couldn't take any of that with him. So it's the reality and truth that even my grandpa told me one day, or he told me this a lot growing up. He said, someday all of this that you see will be somebody else's. And I didn't realize that until I got older. And that is the hard truth that every one of us has to realize. Every dollar you make, the house you have, all the stuff you got is going to be somebody else's someday, because it's staying here. It doesn't go with you. Mm-hmm. So there is something greater that's at work here, and that's what we need to really be considering, and that's what Jesus is, of course, getting at.
Yeah. Do you realize you're spiritually bankrupt? Have you balanced your spiritual account and realized just how in debt that you are? Because if you do, then you're going to turn. And again, you think about what a line to start off with. Because if I really am poor in spirit, if I really realize how spiritually in poverty that I am, then I want to know what's the answer to that. And and he's going to tell us throughout these 3 chapters of this sermon. But right off the bat, I'm going to tell you what the reward is in the end. It's the kingdom of heaven. We get to inherit the kingdom of heaven. It's going to be ours because God's going to supply it. Now, we're not going to buy it because we're poor, in spirit. But God's going to provide it. And, we've got to learn to turn to Him for the answers, not the scribes and the Pharisees and the people that we think of themselves as being righteous.
Yeah. Yeah, He's the only way that we get there.
That's right.
He's the only way to get
exactly
there.
Right.
So if we're not again, this whole idea of putting your complete trust in Him, looking to spiritual things and not connecting ourselves to the physical things that we have, but understanding our great need of God in our life, that's when the true blessings will be given to us.
Let's use another illustration to say the same thing that Jesus is saying here. Have you ever been on a trip and you think you know where you're going, and it suddenly becomes apparent you are not on the right road? You're lost.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So what do we tend to do as men? What do we tend to do when we realize we're lost, or our wife says, do you know where we're going? What do we try to do?
Deny it at all costs.
and try to figure, we're looking at the sun. We're trying to see if there's moss on the trees. We're trying to figure out exactly how we can get and then finally you'll pull over at a gas station, or you'll get out your phone GPS or whatever, and you'll punch it in. You're not going to do that, though, until you give up the fact of thinking I can get back on track on myself.
Yeah.
You're not going to ask for help until you know you need help. And that's what Jesus is teaching here, is that unless you realize that you are spiritually bankrupt, unless you realize that you're so lost and you can't figure out the way yourself, you're never going to turn to the one who can bless you with all spiritual riches, who can get you from the lost to back on track on the right path. So that's a hard thing to do, especially in our culture. It's a hard thing to do, but it's a necessary step. And I know you've seen it. You can see it on people's faces when they realize that. And that's the point. That's always the turning point of converting someone to Jesus, is when you can sense that they've recognized, hey, I can't do this. I got to have something else, someone else. Maybe not even know what they need. I just know I need something.
Yeah. Well, that brought to my mind what Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 7, and this is a result of sin. Of course, all of us have sin, and in this case, he's probably being a little bit more direct. But the idea of sorrow, godly sorrow versus worldly sorrow. Worldly sorrow, just, and I've used an illustration similar to that, where worldly sorrow, when you miss your turn, causes you to keep driving and deny everything. But godly sorrow causes you to go in the next exit, turn around, and get right back on track. And that's the difference, is that godly sorrow leads to repentance without regret, leading to salvation, whereas worldly sorrow leads to only one thing: death. And that's a great contrast that Paul's making in 2 Corinthians 7. Again, in context, he's being pretty specific about what he's discussing here, but it is in regard to sin. And this here, again, we're going back to, I think, this idea of trust and allowing, these words to change our lives. But all of this kind of works and plays together is realizing the ultimate need to follow God no matter what the cost is. And we'll see as we discuss, as you get into the idea of discipleship as a whole, and, as you go further into the teachings of Jesus, that counting the cost is a big part of that. And that has to do with relying on God and trusting in Him fully and giving, the whole self to Him. And only those people who, are humble enough to realize He's the one I need to be following. He's the one I need in my life, And I think all this kind of just plays in together, like we've been saying, from a spiritual perspective. So.
Yeah, and like you stay in the book of Matthew, you jump ahead to Matthew chapter 9, and right after Jesus calls Levi or Matthew to be one of his followers, there's this big meal that Jesus is there sharing with all the, here's another one of those places I mentioned earlier where it separates the tax collectors and the sinners. And then the Pharisees, when they find out about it, they come to the disciples, and why in the world is your a teacher eating with tax collectors and sinners? But you remember what Jesus said to them there. You're there, but down a little bit more, about verse 12 and 13. Those who are healthy don't need a doctor, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means to desire compassion and not sacrifice, because I didn't come to call the righteous, but the sinners. Now, in the greater, we know from Romans, there's none righteous, no, not one. But what's the point here is that the Pharisees aren't well, they're not righteous, but they think they're well, they think they're righteous. The tax collectors and sinners know they're sick, and they know they're not righteous. And that's why they're sitting at the table with Jesus, and the Pharisees are walking around going, I can't believe he's, but again, you get to that. This is the contrast that's going to set up so much. And in writing all of this, Matthew's reminding us as we're reading the Gospel of Matthew, which of those two camps do we fall in? Do we think we're okay enough without Jesus, or do we recognize how much we need Him?
Yeah. That's the big question that everybody has to ask themselves.
Yeah.
Am I good enough on my own or not? And the harsh reality is you're not. And you never will be. And, it's kind of like, Paul uses Pharaoh as an example a few different times. And in one sense, he realizes the power and authority of God, but then right after that, he hardens his heart again and refuses to accept it. Now, of course, we understand that we're kind of talking about two things there, but just the hardness of heart. He thought he was enough. He thought he was more. I'm standing here, and that's kind of what we tend to do, spiritually speaking, is, we recognize the authority of God, but at the same time, I think I've got this. I don't need His help. Israel went through that over and over again, and it only got them in trouble. So, the wisdom of God leads to righteousness because His wisdom is righteous, and ours is nothing but foolish and gets us in trouble over and over again. And that is proven every single day. So if you're listening to this and you think you're enough spiritually, you're not. Just point it out. You can be upset with me. You can be mad at me. You can write a hateful comment. That's fine. But you're not. And that truth is never going to change because we've got to have Jesus. We've got to have the blood of Christ. We've got to change and be transformed to live according to His ways and not our own, because that's what leads to these blessings that we're talking about.
That's right.
Well, we got into the first one, and we will work through the next the next rest of those next week, and hopefully we're able to give you some insights and thoughts into some of the stuff that by way of introduction into some of these things. There's so much to think about. We probably were wrong in how we thought about this, Corey. We should have just stayed in the Beatitudes, but we're going to make our way. So we're going to tackle
this
the rest.
This season will be the Beatitudes. Next season will be...
Yeah. So really, this will be one season with 87 episodes. We're just going to call it different. But we're going to split this up, and we'll come back next week with the rest of these Beatitudes and look at each one of them and try to tie everything in together, of course, and do our best to make some application to our life. And hopefully we've been able to do some of that today with some of the illustrations that we have given. There's so many connections within the text to this idea that's being said. And we really do hope that this spurns, more desire for you to dig into this stuff and to consider all the different things that, you think it connects to and see how it does or how it doesn't. But it's a lot of fun. This is good stuff. I love doing this kind of stuff. And hopefully those of you who are listening are enjoying the conversation. Corey, do you have anything else before we let everyone go?
You're a good man. I appreciate you letting me do this with you.
Well, you're the real star of this show, so I'm just the guy with the button. It's not even a big red button. I've got a small blue button. I'm not. Yeah, got the wrong program, but no, this is a lot of fun, and we're glad that all of you who are tuning in with us each week are joining us in this study and in each of our seasons that we've had. So. We hope and pray that everything that we have talked about will be a great blessing for you and will help you in your own personal study and give you a lot of things to think about. But we are going to call this one good and come back to you next week with the rest of the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5. And we'll discuss those in depth and continue on moving forward and lay all this stuff out. But we're just hopeful that it is a blessing to you. So until next time, we hope that the Lord will bless you in your daily walk with Him, that you will rely fully on Him and trust in Him only, and realize the great wisdom that He has for our life. And so until next time, stay untied.